Joining me now is another member of the Trump administration who's speaking out against his former boss, former National Security Advisor, Ambassador John Bolton. I want to start. The New York Times has been reporting that former President Trump was obsessed with these classified documents, and aides described these documents as his beautiful mind materials. Is that consistent with what you saw when you were his National Security Advisor? And was there any one particular document that stuck out to you that he was obsessed with?
Well, I think he was kind of a collector of things that he thought were of interest to him for some reason or another. Clippings, mementos, classified documents. And it was very disturbing. We could see in the course of meetings with him, intelligence briefings, decision meetings, that sometimes he liked to retain things, and it became the practice just to make sure that we got them back in as many cases as we could. Obviously, we failed in many cases, but it was a pattern that was evident to me from sort of my earliest days.
Did he ever ask you to hold on to a document that concerned you?
Well, there were some that we did get back. Others, the most famous that to me demonstrates why I don't need to read the indictment or believe its allegations are true, although I'm pretty confident they are, was the famous tweet that he did after getting an overhead picture of a failed Iranian missile launch, which he was shown during an intelligence briefing, didn't give back, and it was tweeted before the intelligence officials got back to their offices. There's utterly no excuse for that. There's no conceivable reason for that, except it made him feel good to be able to do it. That's one example, but it's typical of the mindset, in my view.
Now, there are some themes, as we've seen in the indictment, in terms of the types of documents. And I wanted to ask you, because back in 2018, you reportedly requested that the Pentagon give Trump options for military strikes against Iran. And similar intelligence is the subject of the recording from 2021 that Trump was heard bragging about. Now, you haven't seen the document, of course, but how concerned are you about that type of information being out in public, a plan to strike Iran?
Well, you ask for a lot of options for a lot of different things. That's one thing a national security advisor does, and so that was true for a lot of countries. Those were the kinds of documents prepared by the Pentagon, sometimes by the intelligence community, that we took special pains not to let get around very much. In some cases, the president goes over to the tank at the Pentagon to get the briefings, and it's pretty clear he doesn't take documents with him. So I think one question here is how a lot of these documents may have come into his possession. And I think that's something that we should be concerned about. But there are, I don't know what documents Jack Smith has listed in that indictment, but I do know the kinds of documents we put before the president, as we should, to permit him to make decisions, to consider his options and the consequences of decisions. And they contain America's most secret information.
You also know Trump, and you watched him. You were his national security advisor for a whole year. You wrote a book about it.
17 wonderful months. 17
wonderful months. I'll quote you on that. You know that he has a penchant and a love for dictators. He's been vocal about it. Are you concerned that he wanted to keep some of these documents to share them with people he shouldn't have?
Well, I think his motives are hard to read. Fortunately, you don't have to know what the motives are to get a conviction in this matter. But I think Trump's attraction to authoritarian leaders had something to do, and I'm not a shrink and I don't pretend to be, had something to do with these were big guys, Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping. They did what they wanted to do. And I think Trump wanted to do what he wanted to do.
I want to ask you about the declassification of information. You've worked for 4 presidents, 3 of them before Trump. I know you've said that there are no limitations to what a president can declassify. But in your experience, isn't there a typical process where there would be a record of it? Presidents would typically, at least in my experience, want to have an intelligence assessment of what the impact would be. How did it work under the other 3 presidents you worked for?
Well, if they had an idea they wanted something declassified, for which there are legitimate reasons, people can think back to the Cuban Missile Crisis with Adlai Stevenson at the UN Security Council showing Russian missile sites under construction. There's a good reason to do that. The president would say, give me an assessment of what it would do to us, to sources and methods or whatever, if we declassified this, and the bureaucracy would give him an answer back. Trump couldn't care less what the bureaucracy thought. It was what he wanted to do. The key thing here, people misunderstand that there are limitations on what the president can do, and they're not. But once the president has made a decision, he has to make it manifest. In Trump's case, because he focuses only on himself, he's got a document in front of him. He says, I'm going to take this and declassify it, not realizing there are probably dozens of copies of that document, hard copies, electronic copies all over the government. And really what's classified is not the piece of paper or the electrons, it's the information. If you don't tell the rest of the government you've declassified something, the government can become paralyzed.
Well, I ask you that also because there is a difference between when a president is concerned about the impact of declassification, which every president, most presidents would have been except for Trump. I wanted to ask you because Trump went pretty crazy on you. That's my summary here.
That's a daily occurrence.
Okay, accusing you of illegally releasing classified information in a book you wrote after you left the White House. I want to take a listen to what he said, and we'll talk about it on the other side.
I will consider every conversation with me as president highly classified. So that would mean that if he wrote a book and if the book gets out, he's broken the law. And I would think that he would have criminal problems. That's called criminal liability. That's a big thing.
How does that sit with you now?
Well, this is an example of Trump trying to weaponize his own Department of Justice against his political enemies. And what he failed to understand, what people in the White House counsels failed to understand, what people at the Justice Department under his orders in both cases failed to understand.
Including former Attorney General Bill Barr.
Correct, and his deputy. Was that the book had gone through the standard pre-publication review process for, I can tell you, an arduous 4 months, where a National Security Council senior director we went through it line by line. Her work has been described in an 18-page letter her attorney filed in the court case Trump brought. He tried to stop the book being published. He tried to prevent me from getting any revenues from it, and he tried to launch a criminal investigation. They put subpoenas out to my publisher and my book agent. Now, the civil case was dropped later with good and sufficient reason because we would have had discovery into what had happened in the Trump Justice Department and White House if the case had proceeded. And the criminal investigation went away because there was no basis for it.
Doesn't it prove, though, if he went so crazy after you, that he knew about the dangers of the sharing of classified information, or they had a concern about it, knew how the process worked?
No, because he also said, I wish you had had that clip, if he publishes the book after the election, it's okay. Well, if it was classified in June of 2020 when the book was published, it would have been classified the Wednesday after the Tuesday in November when the election took place. He didn't want the book out, not because he thought there was classified information in it, but because of what he suspected I was going to write about him.
I want to ask you a little bit about how a number of members of the Republican Party are defending Donald Trump. Listen to what Senator Marco Rubio had to told Fox News recently.
Even if you read the indictment, nowhere does it say, and as a result, the national security of the United States was harmed in this way, okay? And you have to weigh that with an indictment that now is going to put our country in a deep, already divided and polarized country in a really dangerous place.
So he is on the Senate Intelligence Committee. He has talked in the past about his concern about Trump having access to national security information. Why do you think he can't just say what you've said?
Well, I think I have a lot of respect for Marco Rubio. I think the party as a whole is risking falling into the trap of Caesarism, that this leader gets deference regardless of our political principles. And I think we've got to follow our principles and let the consequences fall where they may. In this case, the reason the mishandling of classified information was serious because it put at risk these sensitive pieces of information, making it more likely that a foreign adversary could get their hands on it. It's not enough to say, well, the Russians and the Chinese don't have it, although we don't know that for sure. It's that it was increased the danger they could get it. That's why the criminal statutes are written the way they are, for very prudent reasons.
Before I let you go, there's an election coming up. If it is Trump versus Biden again, are you going to support Trump again?
I didn't support Trump in 2020. I did support him in 2016. Bill and Hillary Clinton were a year ahead of me in law school, and so I knew them both, and I thought it was worth taking the risk on Trump. In 2020,
what about 24?
I wrote in the name of a conservative Republican in Maryland where I vote, and I would do the same in 2024 because neither election was there a real conservative Republican on the ballot.
Ambassador John Bolton, happy Father's Day. Congratulations to your daughter for her marriage this weekend, and thank you for joining me this afternoon.